Actually, I wanted to, just because when you're talking about Abuja or Guerrero, and it sounds like, oh, it sounds like a beautiful, I'm going to Abuja next week because it sounds so nice. And this is actually for Nina too, because Nina's a badass, if any of you don't know, that she's been a photographer before teaching, and she worked in Bosnia and did amazing work. Photographer Stanley Green, who's quite known, said to me last week in Perpignan, France, at the biggest photojournalism festival in the world, he said, Nina's archive is incredible, and they're just digging through that now. As a kind of fearful person, how, Abuja is very difficult. I did a story at National Geographic a couple of years ago with a man who has lots of experience in war. What kind of, I hope, security precautions are you taking? What do you set up with family members? Do you work alone, or do you working with a fixer? Do you work with security? I mean, the same Adriana and Guerrero, it's Mexican journalists. It's probably the most dangerous place in the world for journalists to work.
Outside of a war zone.
It's really, it's very dangerous. Mexican border, the same thing. How do you do that? Is it something that you naturally have, or is it something that you put yourself in that position and you realize that you can't deal with this fear?
I'm not gonna answer that. I'm just gonna add for our guests. Basically, how do you keep your confidence and your nerve up without being reckless, in a way? And do you do much preparation? Do you feel that security can sometimes hinder you? Like Malin, you said that when you arrived at the detention center, the men were amazingly welcoming to you, yet what you had heard was that it was a scary place and a frightening place maybe. And so you're also finding things that go against what you've been told, I think. And maybe for me, that's part of the amazing talent that I see here, is that you're kind of going against the conventional thinking of certain places.
I mean, I think it's interesting working sometimes in like high-risk zones, because there's usually like a system set up in high-risk zones, like safe places, or like, of course, no place, like I've been in war zones and like different conflict areas, but there is a certain set up way to move about it, because usually there's some kind of aid organizations or other journalists that work there, so you kind of like know your routes. Of course, nothing is 100%, like the story in South Sudan, like last month really took me aback, where there was a safe compound that was raided by military, where they raped a bunch of aid workers, and like these are one of the areas that probably one of us would be staying, and that really like took me aback, because like in your head when you're there you kind of feel like you're safe because you kind of know where it's going on. Like I'm sometimes more worried in places where she works at, where things are coming at you in different directions and you can't really tell where it's coming from.
Well, in Mexico, it's a little complicated because you can't trust anyone. You can't trust the police. You can't trust the army. You can't really trust anyone. So you don't really know what's going to happen, and it's kind of random, and it looks quiet, and it looks like nothing's happening, and then there's a shootout, and the next thing you know, there's a car with 15 bullet holes, right in front of you, and there's all these things going on, but I think we know that's happening there, and I just try to be assert where I'm going and not being reckless, but you have to take some risks, otherwise you wouldn't do anything if you were just stay in a safe place or stay in my apartment, right? And so what I do is, like, if I have to rent a car, I rent a car, I take a picture of the plate, of the license, I send to my editor, I send to my husband, and this is the car, this is the model, I said constantly, what's up, I'm leaving this place now, I'm going there. When I arrive, I say, this is where I am here, this is the hotel I'm staying, this is the room number, and everything. Like when I come back from the day, when I get to my room, I'm here, everything's fine. And so at least, something happens, they know where to start to look for you. But sometimes you have to take risks, like with this family, the BuzzFeed family, they live in Tixla. Tixla is a very small town. and they have one hotel. And the alternative was to be in Chilpancingo, which is not much better, but it's far, and there's a big piece of the road, this stretch of the road that's very dark, and it's very windy, and there's like this drop, and that's where they actually, like, if they want to get rid of someone, it's very easy there because they can make it look as an accident. So everybody's like, don't drive that road at night, don't drive that road at night. But that means I can never have the good light, you know, because like, not in the morning, not in the evening, and it's sunny, it's sunny. So I was like, okay, so we stay in Tixla at the little hotel. But then you can't sleep at night because there's all these cockroaches, and then you find out that it belongs, it's just like walking all over you, and you're exhausted, and then you can't sleep at night because, you know, just all these roaches around. But then the worst than that is you find out that they belong to this huge narco guy, you know, and they know everything you're doing, and you're like, okay, and then someone says, you know what, I don't think it's a good idea for you to stay there. So, you know, there we go, back to Chilpancingo and driving at night. So, you know, sometimes you take risks and you say, okay, but yeah, okay, it's raining, it's just the light I was waiting for, like, should I? Okay, you know, and you just pray, and then you know. But I mean, and then taking these other kinds of precautions. I think BuzzFeed News is doing a great work. They're really on top of
with security.
Yeah. We have a security detail like on top of us. Like on phone, they have the a Telegram chat. We have to, you know, check in every person we're interviewing, every place we're going, every time we leave, every time we get home. Everything. So, I mean, they're far, but at least, you know, they're aware of what you're doing.
So my mom is in the audience.
Do you have insurance?
Yes, I buy Reporters Without Borders insurance when I'm going to specific places, and most of the time when I'm on assignment, I'm reimbursed for that by the publication. But you know, if I'm generally on a trip, I will buy it for the whole trip. I mean, the first thing I would say is that most of the time, what I'm doing doesn't really feel scary. Like when I'm in Kano, it's like, oh no, somebody's gonna feed me too many cookies and juice. You know, like it doesn't feel like what my idea of scary is. And I think in some ways that can really let your guard down. And the best thing to do is to think about the risk, and then once you've decided to accept a risk, you're going to do everything you can to mitigate risk. So what's the safest way to get somewhere? What's the safest way to be there? What's the maximum amount of time you should be there for? What's the minimum amount of time you can be there and get what you need? I would also say, like, I'm not wandering around northern Nigeria by myself. You know, I'm working with people who I trust. So, for example, in Kano, I spent a lot of time driving around with a taxi driver named Sani and a translator named Faisal, and Faisal took the train with me. And you know, when I think back on that trip, like, what are the things I could have done to make it safer? I actually wish I had gone with 2 people, because Faisal eventually fell asleep, which, you know, and I fell asleep too, and it would have been better if there was a 3rd person. So the next time I do something like that, that's what I would do differently. The best thing I did on that trip was have that permission letter, because there were a couple of incredibly dicey moments, and because the people on the train supported me being there, they solved the problems. Like at one stop, I was taking photos from the train of the platform, and there was a guy on the platform who got really angry and tried to pull me off the train and tried to pull my translator off the train, and everybody was screaming, yelling, and like, you know, I just didn't let go, and I like got on my phone and I called the main train guy, and he told everybody to calm down, and we got back on the train, and it was all okay. But if I hadn't had that permission letter, it wouldn't have been okay. You know, there was another time I was driving, I was on assignment for the Wall Street Journal, and I was taking the road from Kano to Maiduguri, and it was a story about, you know, this dangerous road in northern Nigeria. So once you decide to do that, how do you decide to do that safely? So we had Sani drive behind us. We took a truck. We were in the front lorry of a truck. I was with the Wall Street Journal correspondent and with our fixer. And then we had Sani, our taxi driver, drive behind us. And we were detained by the Nigerian military at one point, which frankly is a more realistic and obvious and clear threat to me than Boko Haram. The chances of Boko Haram, anything happening with them, are just so incredibly slim. I mean, it's truly terrible if it does happen, so I'm going to do everything in my power to avoid that. But, you know, the military is a force that I interface with every single day when I'm in northern Nigeria, and they are a much bigger threat. So it's also really important to know what's the real threat and what's the boogeyman.
Yeah, I mean, we were sort of laughing when Adriana talked about waiting for the good light, but that's what we're doing as photographers, right? We're waiting for moments in good light. So, and the last thing you want to do is go into a place that's really dangerous for a couple of hours and not get anything good. So you want to make sure that it's worth your time. I think in my own personal work that I showed here from the border, which is where I do a lot of my work, because I lived there before it got so bad, I think I have sort of a baseline understanding of what it should feel like. And there are some areas now that I know better not. I just don't go there. There are stories I want to do that I don't do. And then for the stories I do decide to do, I communicate with other people. I do work on my own. I don't want to pay for a fixer, and I also don't think it would be helpful because I speak the language and I do know the area quite well. So I will communicate with law enforcement. I will use retired law enforcement or any sort of like constable's office, sort of lower level law enforcement, because they have no bureaucracy and they just don't care. They think it's hilarious that you want to like tag along with them. So I'll try to enlist anyone that will help me that is like armed and knows the area.